A dog sees his owner after 10 years on the streets. But this reunion isn't the miracle it looks like. When a young woman rescues a half-starved dog from a storm, she doesn't expect the man who rushes forward to claim him. A man the world thought was gone. He's been living in the shadows, hunted by power, betrayed by the system, and holding a secret that could destroy everything. As the truth unravels, kindness turns dangerous, loyalty is tested in fire, and a single act of courage could change their lives forever. Because this isn't just a story about a lost dog finding his owner. It's about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. What could drive a man to vanish for 10 years? And what will it cost when the world finally learns why? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sky darkened without warning over Harbor City's waterfront. Fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into sheets of water that reduced visibility on the busy street. Willa Hart eased her foot onto the brake of her mobile rescue van, squinting through the windshield as the wipers fought against the downpour. A flash of movement caught her eye. Through the rain-streaked glass, she spotted a dog darting between cars, gray-muzzled and moving with the desperate energy of a creature seeking shelter. Her heart jumped into her throat as the dog weaved through traffic. "No, no, no," she whispered, carefully pulling to the curb. The dog paused in the middle of the road, seeming confused by the rain and the honking horns. Willa grabbed her emergency kit and stepped out into the deluge. "Here, buddy," she called softly, crouching down and extending her hand. "Come on, it's okay." The dog's head turned toward her voice. Despite the worn appearance and one torn ear, there was something dignified about him. His amber eyes met hers with an intelligence that spoke of years of street survival. "That's it," she encouraged, as the dog took a hesitant step toward her. "Let's get you out of this rain." The dog moved closer, drawn by her gentle tone. Willa noticed he was limping slightly, nothing severe, but enough to concern her. When he was within reach, she saw he was a mixed breed, probably part shepherd, part who knows what. His fur was matted from the rain, but she could tell he'd once been well cared for. "Good boy," she murmured, carefully checking for a collar. Finding none, she led him to her van, where she kept towels and supplies for just such rescues. The dog followed willingly enough, though she sensed a wariness in him. Inside the van's shelter, Willa dried him off, speaking in soothing tones while checking for injuries. His limp seemed to be from an old injury, nothing acute. On a hunch, she ran her scanner over him, searching for a microchip. The scanner beeped. Willa's eyebrows rose as she read the information. "Rusty," she said aloud, and the dog's ears perked up. But it was the owner's name that made her pause. Boone Keller. "That can't be right," she muttered, double-checking the scan. The chip was old, probably 10 years old at least, but the information was clear enough. A movement outside the van caught her attention. Through the rain-spattered window, she saw a man standing on the sidewalk, staring at her vehicle. He was tall but lean. Too lean, she thought, with grizzled dark blonde hair streaked with gray. His clothes were worn but carefully mended, speaking of someone who maintained what dignity he could. But it was his eyes that held her, weathered blue eyes that had seen too much. They weren't focused on her, though. They were locked on Rusty. The dog's reaction was immediate and electric. He let out a whine that built into an urgent bark, pressing against the van's side window. His whole body trembled with recognition. Willa's heart clenched. "Rusty," she said softly. "Is that him? Is that Boone?" The dog's tail wagged so hard his whole body shook. Without hesitation, Willa opened the van's side door. Rusty bounded out, making a beeline for the man. Despite his previous limp, he moved like a much younger dog, joy evident in every motion. The reunion struck Willa speechless. Rusty pressed himself against the man's chest, whining and licking his face while his tail wagged furiously. The man, Boone, dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog. His face pressed into Rusty's wet fur, and Willa saw his shoulders shake. "I thought I'd lost you," she heard him whisper. "I thought I'd lost you for good, old friend." The rain continued to pour, but neither man nor dog seemed to notice. Willa felt like an intruder on a deeply private moment, but she couldn't look away. 10 years, according to the chip's data. 10 years apart, and still this recognition, this love. Finally, she cleared her throat. "We should get out of this rain," she said. "I can take you both to the clinic." "No." Boone's response was immediate, his body tensing. "No clinics, no official channels." His hands tightened in Rusty's fur. Willa studied him, seeing beyond the worn clothes and careful wariness. She saw the way he held himself, the remnants of pride and dignity that circumstances hadn't managed to strip away. She saw how Rusty pressed against him protectively, as if trying to shield him from the world. "Okay," she said slowly. "No clinics, but at least let me get you both somewhere dry for tonight." She hesitated, then added, "Off the books. Just shelter from the storm." Boone's eyes met hers, searching for deception or hidden motives. Rusty looked between them, tail still wagging, as if encouraging trust. Finally, Boone gave a short nod. "Just for tonight," he said quietly. "Just until the rain stops." Willa helped them both into the van, watching in the rearview mirror as Rusty settled beside Boone, head on his lap, unwilling to let even an inch of space come between them. The dog's eyes closed in contentment as Boone's weathered hand stroked his fur, both of them finding in each other something long lost but never forgotten. As she drove through the rainy streets, Willa felt the weight of what she'd witnessed. In a world that often seemed cold and indifferent, she'd just seen proof that some bonds never break, that love and loyalty could survive a decade of separation and still burn bright enough to warm the coldest night. Rusty's soft whine of happiness filled the van, mixing with the rhythm of the rain and Boone's quiet murmurs of affection. The storm continued outside, but in that moment, within the shelter of her van, Willa witnessed the kind of reunion that reminded her why she'd chosen this work in the first place, not just to save animals, but to protect the profound connections between them and the humans who loved them, no matter what circumstances might try to tear them apart. Inside the van, warmth from the heater slowly began to seep into their damp clothes. Rusty stayed pressed against Boone's side, his gray muzzle resting on the man's leg. Willa adjusted the temperature, sneaking glances in her rearview mirror at the unlikely pair reunited after so many years. "I'll need to register him at the shelter," she said gently, testing the waters. "It's just standard procedure." "No." Boone's voice was firm, but not unkind. His calloused hand never stopped stroking Rusty's fur. "No paperwork, no registration." "It's for his protection," Willa explained, but Boone was already shaking his head. "You don't understand. The new city ordinance. Pike Holdings security teams can take any unregistered animals they find with people living rough. They call them unlicensed vagrancy animals." His voice took on a bitter edge. "Saw them take 3 dogs last week alone." Willa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Pike Holdings, the name hit her like a punch to the gut. Harlan Pike's company was one of the biggest donors to the shelter network. Her fiancé, Reed, handled their legal affairs. She'd seen the man himself at fundraising galas, all silver hair and commanding presence, making speeches about community improvement while his private security teams apparently terrorized the city's most vulnerable residents. "I didn't know about that," she said quietly. Rain drummed steadily on the van's roof as she made a decision. "Okay, no registration. I can keep him overnight at my private clinic. Treat his injuries without paperwork." Some of the tension left Boone's shoulders. "His back leg?" he asked. "I noticed he was favoring it." "Looks like a minor sprain, nothing serious." Willa merged onto the coastal highway, where the streetlights cast orange pools through the rain. "I can wrap it. Give him something for the inflammation." "I used to wrap the dock ropes that way," Boone said suddenly, watching her hands on the wheel. "Double figure 8, keeps the stress even." His voice took on a far-away quality. "Worked the docks for 12 years. Was good at it, too. Foreman by 30. "What happened?" Willa asked softly, though something in her gut told her she already knew. Pike Holdings owned most of the harbor now. Boone's laugh held no humor. "Saw something I shouldn't have. Accident waiting to happen. Faulty crane equipment, safety violations. Reported it up the chain." His hand stilled on Rusty's fur. "Next thing I know, I'm being charged with assault. Lost my job, my apartment, my ID, everything but Rusty here." He looked down at the dog. "Lost him too eventually. Night raid on the camp. Been looking ever since." Willa pulled into her clinic's back lot, mind racing. She knew Reed handled Pike's difficult cases. How many other Boones were out there, she wondered, their lives destroyed to protect corporate profits? Inside, she worked efficiently, checking Rusty's vitals and wrapping his leg, while Boone watched with careful attention. The dog's trust in them both made everything easier. He seemed to sense they were working together to help him. "He'll need to rest that leg," she explained, demonstrating the wrap technique. "And these antibiotics twice a day for the small infection in his ear." "I remember," Boone said quietly. "Used to give him his heartworm pills wrapped in cheese." Something in his voice, the pride of a responsible pet owner, not quite forgotten, made Willa's throat tight. She turned away, busying herself with supplies. "We can meet at dawn," she said, "near the camp where it's safe for you. I'll bring him back with medication and some food." Boone nodded. "The old loading dock, behind the fish market. Early, before the day crews arrive." The plan felt fragile, balanced on trust and good intentions. Willa thought about Reed, about the shelter board, about all the rules and regulations she was choosing to break. But looking at Boone's weathered face, at Rusty's absolute devotion, she knew she couldn't do anything else. "Dawn it is," she agreed. "No authorities, no attention, just getting a good dog back to someone who loves him." Boone stood slowly, reluctance in every movement. Rusty whined, pressing against his leg. "It's okay, boy," Boone murmured. "Just for tonight. She'll take good care of you." He looked at Willa, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of trust in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "Get some rest," she replied. "Both of you." After Boone left, Willa sat with Rusty in her office, the dog's head heavy on her lap. Outside, the rain continued to fall. She thought about Reed, probably working late at his pristine downtown office, handling Pike's latest problems. She thought about the shelter board and their donor plaques and their carefully worded policies. She scratched behind Rusty's ears, feeling him sigh in contentment. Sometimes, she realized, doing right meant working in the shadows, in the spaces between official channels. She would help them. This man and his dog who had found each other against all odds, and she would do it carefully, quietly, off the books. Dawn would come soon enough. For now she had preparations to make and a tightrope to walk between her structured life and this new territory of necessary defiance. The pre-dawn waterfront lay shrouded in mist, streetlights creating weak halos in the drizzling rain. Willa guided her van through the empty streets, windshield wipers keeping steady time. Rusty sat alert in the passenger seat, his bandaged leg carefully positioned, amber eyes fixed on the road ahead. As she approached the meeting point behind the fish market, flashing lights cut through the gray morning. Her heart dropped. 3 black SUVs with Pike Holdings security emblazoned on their sides were parked at angles around the encampment. Men in dark uniforms moved between the makeshift shelters with military precision. "No, no, no," she whispered, pulling to a stop at a careful distance. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she watched guards systematically overturn tents and toss belongings into large black garbage bags. The unhoused residents huddled at the edges, faces drawn with helpless anger as their few possessions disappeared. Rusty's low growl made her turn. Through the side mirror, she spotted Boone emerging from the shadows, his expression tightening as he took in the scene. Their eyes met briefly before a guard's shout drew her attention. "Check that van!" 2 guards started toward her, hands on their belts. Willa's pulse quickened. She opened her door, trying to project professional calm. "I'm here for the morning feeding program," she said, reaching for her clinic ID. "We coordinate with the shelter." "Area's restricted," the first guard cut her off. His partner circled the van, peering through windows. "Pike Holdings conducting a sanctioned sweep under City Ordinance 473. The second guard's eyes locked on Rusty. "That dog licensed?" Before Willa could answer, the guard grabbed her arm, shoving her roughly against the van's step. Pain shot through her hip as she stumbled. Rusty barked sharply, and she heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. "Called for backup," the first guard said, smirking. "Can't have unlicensed animals or unauthorized personnel interfering with a legal sweep." Through the chaos, Willa saw Boone. He stood straight-backed in the rain, shoulders squared, jaw set. The look in his eyes was terrible. The look of a man who'd lost everything once before and was prepared to do it again rather than abandon his dog. In that moment, Willa made her choice. She lunged for the driver's door, yanking it open. "Boone, now!" He moved fast for a man who'd lived rough for so long. In 3 long strides, he reached the van's side door. Rusty was already scrambling toward him as Boone pulled himself inside. The guards shouted, reaching for weapons, but Willa had the engine roaring to life. The van fishtailed as she accelerated. Tires, throwing up sheets of water. A guard's hand slapped against the side panel, then fell away. Through the rearview mirror, she glimpsed the SUV's doors opening, but she was already turning hard onto a side street. "Hold on," she called, taking another sharp turn. The van's suspension protested as she bounced through an alley, emerging onto a parallel street. The sirens Dopplered past somewhere behind them, but Willa kept driving, making random turns, using the rain and the pre-dawn gloom to cover their retreat. Finally, 6 blocks away, she pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed laundromat. Her hands shook as she cut the engine. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rain on the roof and their heavy breathing. "You shouldn't have done that," Boone said finally. His voice was rough. "They'll have your plate number. This will come back on you." They were going to take him. Willa turned in her seat to face him. Rusty lay pressed against Boone's leg, trembling slightly. "They would have impounded him, and you know what happens to unlicensed animals in Pike's system. Which is exactly why you need to let us out here." Boone's face was drawn with familiar resignation. "I've dealt with Pike's machine before. They don't stop. The ordinances, the security teams, the lawyers, it's all designed to grind people down. You've got a life, a career. Don't throw it away. And if we do nothing, Pike wins again." Willa's voice shook with anger. "How many more people lose everything? How many more dogs disappear? This isn't a choice between right and wrong anymore. It's about whether we let them keep getting away with it." Rain drummed on the roof as they stared at each other. Boone's weathered face showed the cost of his last stand against Pike Holdings. But there was something else there, too. A flicker of the man he'd been, the foreman who'd tried to prevent accidents, protect his workers. "I can't ask you to risk everything," he said quietly. "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Willa checked her mirrors, though the parking lot remained empty. "Pike's security has our scent now. We need to be smart about what comes next, but I'm not walking away." Rusty whined softly, pressing closer to Boone. The old dog's loyalty had survived 10 years of separation. Surely they could show the same courage. The rain began to ease, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. Somewhere in the city, Pike's security teams were mobilizing, lawyers were being called, and the machinery of power was grinding into motion. But in the quiet of the van, an unlikely alliance had been forged. A vet tech, an unhoused former foreman, and a gray-muzzled dog, bound together by conscience and the simple determination to stand against injustice. They couldn't stay here long. Decisions would need to be made, plans formed. But for now, they had won a small victory, kept faith with each other and with what was right. It would have to be enough for the moment. The Reward laundromat's empty parking lot offered temporary shelter, but Willa knew they couldn't stay long. She turned off the engine to conserve gas, leaving them in a cocoon of rain-muffled silence. Through the foggy windows, the world seemed distant, giving them a moment to breathe. Boone sat with his back against the van's wall, one hand absently stroking Rusty's ear. The old dog hadn't left his side since their escape. Finally, Boone spoke, his voice low and measured. "It wasn't really an accident," he said. "That's what they called it in the papers. But we all knew better." Willa turned in her seat to listen. The story came out in pieces, like shards of broken glass being carefully arranged to show the whole picture. "I was foreman on Dock 3. Good job, union benefits, respect." His eyes grew distant. Pike Holdings had been pushing schedules, cutting corners on maintenance. The crane cables were showing wear, but replacing them would have meant shutting down operations for 2 days. He paused, swallowing hard. "I filed reports. Proper channels. Then Joey Martinez got caught in a cable snap. Lost his arm, 3 kids at home, wife working 2 jobs already. That's when I went to the safety board." Rusty whined softly, sensing his master's pain. Boone's weathered hands clenched. "Next day my ID badge wouldn't work. Security escorted me out. By afternoon my union rep wouldn't take my calls. Bank account frozen for suspicious activity. Then came the assault charge." "Assault?" Willa leaned forward. "Security camera footage showed me attacking a co-worker. Except I was home that night. Had receipts from the grocery store, neighbors who saw me. Didn't matter. The footage was just clear enough to identify me, just blurry enough that you couldn't prove it wasn't me." He gave a bitter laugh. "Really professional job." "The witness list for the safety hearing got leaked," he continued. "Everyone who'd signed statements backing me up suddenly changed their stories. Doors slammed everywhere I turned. No shelter would take me. Seems Pike Holdings is a major donor to most charities in the Harbor District." The names he mentioned sparked recognition in Willa's mind. Cases, dates, settlements, all handled by Reed's firm during his first years there. The pieces clicked into horrible focus. "I need to make a call," she said quietly, stepping out into the drizzle. Reed answered on the 3rd ring. "Willa, where are you? The office said you canceled your morning appointments." "We need to talk about Boone Keller." A pause. Then, smoothly, "The homeless man from the sweep? Has he been harassing you? He was a witness in the Martinez case, the one that made your reputation at the firm. Willa. Reed's voice cooled. That man is manipulating you. He's had 10 years to perfect his story. The facts are clear. He assaulted a co-worker, destroyed evidence, and fled rather than face charges. Don't let misplaced sympathy cloud your judgment. The assault footage was doctored. The witness list was leaked, his ID. Stop. The word cracked like a whip. You're involving yourself in matters you don't understand. Pike Holdings is a major donor to your clinic. It would be unfortunate if that relationship became strained. The threat hung in the air between them. Willa's hand tightened on her phone. Are you threatening my job? I'm advising my fiancé to be careful. His tone softened, becoming reasonable, concerned. You do important work helping animals. Don't throw that away over some street person's sob story. The call ended. Willa stood in the rain, letting it cool her burning cheeks. The man she'd agreed to marry had just threatened everything she'd built, and done it so smoothly, so reasonably, as if he were protecting her from her own naive impulses. When she returned to the van, Boone was checking the latches on Rusty's carrier. His face was set in familiar lines of resignation. You've done more than enough, he said quietly. We'll disappear. No one needs to know you helped us. No. The word came out sharp, surprising them both. I'm not walking away. They'll destroy you. His voice was rough with remembered pain. They're good at it. Rusty's paw came to rest on Boone's boot, a gesture so simple, so loyal, it brought tears to Willa's eyes. The old dog had found his master after 10 years. He wasn't letting go now. Before everything happened, Willa said carefully, did you have anything stored away? Papers? Proof? Anything you managed to hide? Boone's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Maybe. I had a storage unit. Paid up for 5 years. Key's long gone, but Rusty... He looked down at the dog. He was with me when I stashed some things. If the unit's still there, then that's where we start. Willa climbed back into the driver's seat. They took your life apart, piece by piece. Maybe it's time we started putting it back together. The rain was letting up, pale morning light seeping through the clouds. They couldn't stay here much longer. But for the first time in 10 years, Boone had allies in his corner. The machinery that had ground him down was still running, still powerful. But no machine was perfect. Sometimes all it took was a few grains of sand in the gears, or in this case, a determined vet tech, a wronged man, and a loyal dog who refused to forget. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the van's interior as Willa watched Boone gently run his fingers along Rusty's worn collar. His weathered hands moved with careful purpose, feeling each seam and fold of the leather. I almost forgot, he murmured, more to himself than to Willa. Back when things started getting bad, I knew I needed somewhere safe. His voice trailed off as his fingers found what they were searching for, a slight bulge in the collar's lining. Willa leaned forward, curious. What is it? Using his thumbnail, Boone worked at a nearly invisible seam until it gave way. From within the leather, he pulled out a small key, its surface flaked with rust but still intact. He held it up, and it caught the light filtering through the van's windows. Storage unit, he explained, his voice rough with emotion. Paid 5 years in advance before everything fell apart. Unit 2348 at Harbor Lock and Store. Willa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's across town, if it's still there. Big if, Boone agreed. He scratched behind Rusty's ears. Good boy, all these years, keeping it safe. The drive to Harbor Lock and Store took them through industrial backstreets, where delivery trucks rumbled past empty warehouses. Willa parked the van behind a stack of shipping containers, out of sight of the main office. The storage facility stretched before them in rows of identical metal doors. 2348, Boone repeated softly. Block D if they haven't changed the layout. They walked quickly, Rusty padding silently between them. The morning was growing warmer, but Willa felt a chill as they passed row after row of locked units. Each step seemed to echo off the metal doors. Here. Boone stopped so suddenly that Willa nearly bumped into him. Unit 2348 looked like all the others, a corrugated metal door with a simple lock. The number was faded but readable. Boone's hand shook slightly as he inserted the key. For a heart-stopping moment, it stuck. Then, with a grinding sound that made Willa wince, it turned. The door protested as they lifted it, the metal groaning from years of disuse. Musty air washed over them. Willa pulled out her phone and switched on its flashlight, illuminating a space about 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide. Boxes lined one wall, their cardboard surfaces gray with dust. A tarp-covered shape that might have been furniture occupied the back corner. But Boone moved straight to a metal filing cabinet against the right wall. The bottom drawer, he said, kneeling. I kept the most important things here. The drawer squealed as he pulled it open. Willa crouched beside him, holding the light steady. Inside, manila envelopes and folders lay exactly as they had been placed a decade ago. Boone lifted out a hard drive, carefully wrapped in bubble wrap. A label on its surface showed shift numbers and dates. This has the real security footage, he said quietly. Shows me nowhere near the scene of the supposed assault. Willa's pulse quickened as Boone next removed a thick stack of papers, held together with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. She helped him carefully remove them, and they began to read through the printed emails. Look at this, she whispered, pointing to one dated just weeks before the accident that had started Boone's downfall. Internal memo about brake part substitutions. They knew the replacements didn't meet safety standards. Pike's signature right there, Boone confirmed, his finger tracing the bottom of the page. Authorizing the change to save 20% on components. They worked methodically, creating piles of documents, purchase orders showing the substandard parts, email chains discussing cost-cutting measures that violated safety regulations, internal reports detailing accidents that had been covered up. We need to copy all of this, Willa said, her mind racing. If we can get the hard drive data recovered and these documents scanned somewhere secure. Boone nodded, but his hands had started to shake as he touched each piece of paper, fragments of his former life, preserved in this metal box, while everything else had been stripped away. Willa noticed and placed her hand gently on his arm. One step at a time, she said softly. Let's prioritize. The hard drive first. That's the strongest proof. Then the emails about the brake parts. Those connect directly to Pike. The access code, Boone said suddenly, tensing. When I opened the unit, the system probably logged it. If Pike has someone watching the old codes. As if in answer, they heard the distant sound of a car door slamming. Rusty's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Working quickly now, they gathered the most crucial documents. Willa slipped the hard drive into her jacket pocket while Boone restored the remaining papers to their drawer. They closed the cabinet as quietly as possible. Footsteps echoed between the storage units, still distant but growing closer. Willa's heart pounded as she aimed her flashlight at the door's track, helping Boone guide it down with minimal noise. The lock clicked into place just as voices became audible from the next row over. This way, Willa whispered, leading them in the opposite direction from the approaching sounds. Rusty moved silently beside them, his body alert but controlled. They wound their way through the maze of storage units, using the columns of morning sunlight between buildings as guides. The voices faded, then grew louder again. Their pursuers were quartering the facility systematically. Finally, they reached the shipping containers where Willa had parked. She opened the van's side door as quietly as possible, helping Rusty in first, then Boone. The engine's start seemed deafening in the morning quiet, but she forced herself to accelerate slowly, naturally, as if they were just another customer finishing early business. As they turned onto the main road, Willa glimpsed two men in dark suits through her rearview mirror, emerging from between the storage units. Their stance and purposeful movement marked them clearly as security rather than customers. "They'll check the logs," Boone said quietly, once they were several blocks away. "They'll know someone accessed that unit." "But they don't know what we found," Willa replied, patting the hard drive in her pocket. "And they don't know where we're going." The morning sun had burned away the last of the harbor mist. In the back of the van, Rusty settled between the boxes of medical supplies, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert. The old dog had helped preserve the evidence for 10 years. Now it was up to them to use it. The hard drive seemed to burn in Willa's pocket. Tangible proof, at last, connecting Pike directly to the corruption that had destroyed Boone's life. But proof was only the beginning. They needed somewhere safe to examine it, someone trustworthy to verify the data, and a plan to use it before Pike's influence could bury it again. A dark silhouette filled the storage unit's doorway, blocking the thin morning light. Nina Caro stood there, her tactical gear absorbing what little illumination filtered in. Her presence brought an immediate chill to the air, more cutting than the morning's dampness. "Access code 4729B, she said, her voice carrying the artificial pleasantness of a coiled snake. "Inactive for 10 years, then suddenly pinged at 5:47 this morning." She took a measured step forward, her boots silent on the concrete floor. "Interesting timing, wouldn't you say?" Willa felt her throat tighten as she noticed the length of pipe in Nina's gloved hand. The security chief's fingers flexed around it, a gesture so casual it seemed almost unconscious. But there was nothing casual about the way Nina's gaze catalogued every detail of the unit, lingering on the scattered papers and open filing cabinet. "Miss Hart," Nina continued, "your fiancé was quite concerned when he couldn't reach you. Such a devoted man, Reed. He called us immediately." The betrayal stung, but Willa forced herself to stay focused on Nina's movements. The security chief was positioning herself to cut off their exit, each step deliberate and measured. "This doesn't have to get messy," Nina said. "Just hand over whatever you think you found, and we can all walk away. Mr. Pike is a reasonable man." "Reasonable men don't need private security forces." Boone's voice was quiet but firm. "Or ordinances targeting the homeless. Or thugs with pipes." Nina's practiced smile hardened. "You lost the right to opinions about Mr. Pike's methods when you tried to destroy his company. 10 years hasn't changed that." She moved with shocking speed, the pipe whistling through the air toward Willa's head. But Rusty's sharp bark split the air, a warning that gave Willa just enough time to flinch backward. The pipe cut empty air where she had been standing. Boone lunged forward, putting himself between Willa and Nina. The pipe came around again, catching him across the shoulder with a sickening thud. He grunted but didn't fall, using the momentum to slam his palm against the wall, directly onto the fire alarm. The effect was instant and overwhelming. Shrieking alarms filled the air as sprinklers burst to life overhead. The sudden downpour transformed the storage unit into a chaos of water and sound. Cardboard boxes began to sag, their contents spilling onto the increasingly slick floor. Emergency lights strobed through the artificial rain, creating a disorienting effect of fractured motion. Shapes became harder to track, movements breaking into stuttering snapshots of action, Water streamed down faces and soaked through clothes, making every surface treacherous. "Run!" Boone shouted over the din, grabbing Willa's arm. They bolted from the unit, Rusty keeping pace beside them. The sprinklers had activated throughout the facility, turning the narrow corridors into a maze of falling water and flashing lights. Their footsteps splashed through growing puddles as they ran. Nina's voice echoed behind them, somehow cutting through the cacophony. "You're just adding charges. Theft, breaking and entering, assault on security personnel." Willa clutched the cloned drive tight against her body, shielding it from the water as best she could. Her shoes slipped on the wet concrete as they rounded another corner, but Boone's steady hand kept her upright. They could hear Nina pursuing them, her footsteps more sure, more practiced at this kind of chase. She was gaining ground despite the chaos and poor visibility. The strobing lights caught glimpses of her closing the distance, water streaming off her tactical gear. "There!" Willa pointed to a metal door marked with an emergency exit sign. Boone hit it with his shoulder, the impact echoing through the corridor. For a heart-stopping moment, it held firm. Then it burst open with a screech of protesting hinges, spilling them out into the cold morning air. The rain outside was natural, but no less drenching than the sprinklers had been. They emerged into a loading area behind the storage facility, chain-link fences dripping in the gray light. The sudden transition from the strobing emergency lights to natural daylight left them blinking, momentarily disoriented. "This way," Willa gasped, pointing toward where she'd parked the van. They ran through the rain, feet splashing through puddles that reflected the heavy clouds above. The wet pavement made every step treacherous, but fear kept them moving. Rusty stayed close, his fur plastered to his body, but his movement still sure and purposeful. Behind them, the emergency door slammed open again. Nina's voice carried through the rain. "Pike will bury you both. Whatever you think you have, it won't be enough." But they were already reaching the van. Willa's trembling fingers found the key fob, and the doors unlocked with a chirp that seemed absurdly normal amid the chaos. They piled in. First Rusty, then Boone, finally Willa scrambling into the driver's seat, her soaked clothes immediately soaking the upholstery. The engine caught on the first try, and Willa sent up a silent prayer of thanks as she threw the van into reverse. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could see Nina emerging from between two parked cars, but they were already moving. The van fishtailed slightly as Willa turned onto the street, but she kept control. Water sprayed from under the tires as they accelerated away from the storage facility, leaving Nina's dark figure diminishing in the rearview mirror. They drove in tense silence for several blocks, all of them dripping, breathing hard, listening for sirens. Finally, when it became clear they weren't being followed, Willa pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed hardware store. "Let me see your shoulder," she said to Boone, turning in her seat. "It's fine." He tried to wave her off, but she could see him wincing. "That pipe hit you hard. Let me check." While she examined the angry bruise already forming on his shoulder, Willa felt the weight of what had just happened settling over them. The violence of Nina's attack, the desperate chase, the absolute certainty that Pike would do anything to stop them, it had all become terrifyingly real. "The drive?" Boone asked. Willa pulled it from her jacket pocket. Despite their soaking, she'd managed to keep it relatively protected. "It seems okay. We'll need to dry it carefully before trying to access it." Rusty shook himself, sending a spray of water through the van's interior. The simple, dog-like action broke some of the tension, drawing tired smiles from both of them. "Pike's not bluffing," Boone said quietly, reaching down to scratch behind Rusty's ears. "What happened back there? That's just the beginning." Willa nodded, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "I know, but we can't stop now. We have the evidence. We just need to figure out how to use it before Pike can bury it, and us, for good." The rain continued to drum on the van's roof as they sat there, water dripping from their clothes, each lost in thought about what would come next. The cloned drive held the truth they needed, but Nina's attack had made one thing crystal clear. Getting that truth out would be a fight for their lives. The veterinary clinic stood dark and quiet, its usual daytime bustle replaced by the soft hum of equipment and the occasional whimper from the recovery kennels. Willa's hands shook slightly as she unlocked the back door, ushering Boone and Rusty inside. The familiar antiseptic smell did little to calm her racing thoughts. "We can use my office," she whispered, though they were alone. Something about the night made even normal volumes feel wrong. "The computer there isn't connected to the main network." Boone followed her down the dim hallway, his footsteps careful and measured. Rusty's nails clicked softly against the linoleum floor. The dog seemed to sense the need for quiet, staying close to Boone's leg. Inside her small office, Willa closed the blinds before turning on the desk lamp. Its warm light created a small island of visibility in the darkness. She pulled out her chair and gestured for Boone to take it. "You'll know what we're looking at better than I will," she said, connecting the drive to her computer. The screen's blue light illuminated their faces as files began populating the display. Boone's fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising speed, opening folders and scanning documents. "These are maintenance logs," he murmured. "Inspection reports, parts inventories." His voice grew tighter with each file. "Everything I tried to show them 10 years ago." Willa leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. The technical language was dense, but even she could see the pattern of corners cut, safety protocols ignored, warnings dismissed. Then Boone opened a folder labeled simply Financials. "Wait," he said suddenly, his finger pointing to a line item. "That's not right." The spreadsheet showed a series of wire transfers, each carefully documented. But one entry stood out, a payment to something called Meridian Consulting Group, authorized with a familiar name. "Reed Danner," Willa read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. The signature was unmistakable. She'd seen it countless times on cards and letters. "He was already working with Pike back then?" Boone nodded slowly. "Meridian was one of their shell companies. They used it to move money around, make problems disappear." He glanced up at her. "People disappear too." The revelation hit Willa like a physical blow. Reed hadn't just been representing Pike recently. He'd been part of the scheme from the beginning. Every dinner where he'd dismissed her concerns about Pike's influence in the city, every time he'd told her she was being too idealistic about corporate responsibility, he'd known. He'd always known. "We need to run," Boone said quietly. "You've seen what they're capable of. Take Rusty. Go somewhere they can't find you." Rusty lifted his head at his name, looking between them with wise, worried eyes. But Willa straightened her spine, shaking her head. "No. Running means they win. It means this happens to someone else." She met Boone's gaze steadily. "The truth matters more than my comfort." She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a familiar number. Dr. Lenora Voss had been more than just her mentor during veterinary training. She'd been a model of quiet integrity in a world that often rewarded the opposite. The phone rang 3 times before Lenora's voice came through, warm despite the late hour. "Willa, is everything all right?" "I need your help, Dr. Voss, and I need to know you'll keep this completely confidential." There was a pause, then, "Come to my house. Use the back door." 20 minutes later, they sat in Lenora's kitchen while she examined the files on her own encrypted laptop. Her silver hair was tied back with her trademark pen, her glasses reflecting the screen's glow as she worked. "This is explosive stuff," she said finally, looking up at them. "But it needs to be protected. One copy isn't enough. They could destroy it too easily." Her fingers moved quickly, creating backups. "I'll store copies in separate secure locations, but you'll need more than just the raw data. We need someone who can decode the money trail," Willa said carefully, glancing at Boone. "Someone who knows how to follow the numbers." Boone's jaw tightened, his hands clasping together. The proud set of his shoulders spoke of old hurts, bridges burned or broken. But finally, he spoke. "My sister, Maris. She's a bookkeeper, always has been. Detail-oriented, sees patterns others miss." He swallowed hard. "We haven't spoken since everything happened." "Would she help?" Willa asked gently. "I don't know. She tried to protect her family by staying away from my mess. Can't blame her for that." Willa touched his arm lightly. "Let me try. Sometimes it's easier to hear hard things from a stranger." After another long moment, Boone nodded, reciting a phone number from memory. Willa stepped into Lenora's garden to make the call, the night air cool against her face. The phone rang and rang, finally clicking to voicemail. Willa took a deep breath. "Hello, Maris. My name is Willa Hart. I'm calling about your brother Boone." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We found evidence about what really happened at Pike Holdings 10 years ago. We need someone who can understand the financial records, someone trustworthy. Boone thought of you." Another pause. "This isn't about forgiveness, it's about truth. If you're willing to help, please call me back." She left her number and ended the call, staring at the phone for a long moment. Behind her, through Lenora's kitchen window, she could see Boone sitting with Rusty's head in his lap, the dog offering silent comfort as they waited. The weight of Reed's betrayal pressed against her chest, but oddly, it felt like clarity rather than pain. She'd chosen her path now, not the comfortable lie, but the harder road toward truth. Whatever came next, there would be no going back. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Maris arrived, her practical shoes squeaking slightly on the worn linoleum. She paused in the doorway, scanning faces until she found Willa's. Her auburn gray braid hung over one shoulder, and her glasses slipped down her nose as she nodded a cautious greeting. "Thank you for coming," Willa said softly, standing to welcome her. Maris's hands twisted together. Is Boone here?" "Not yet. I thought you might want to talk first." Relief and disappointment warred on Maris's face as she sat down. 10 years, she whispered. 10 years of wondering if he was alive, if he was safe. She cleared her throat. "You said you found evidence?" Willa pulled out her tablet, showing Maris the financial records. The older woman's professional demeanor emerged instantly, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "These transfer patterns, they're deliberate, designed to look random but following a clear sequence." She looked up sharply. "You really have something here." The bell above the door chimed. Boone stood in the entrance, Rusty at his heel. The siblings stared at each other, a decade of unspoken words hanging between them. "Maris," Boone said hoarsely. She stood, hands fluttering uncertainly. You look tired, little brother." A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. "Not so little anymore." "No," she agreed softly. "Not for a long time." They moved to Willa's van for privacy, the familiar territory helping to ease the tension. Rusty settled at Boone's feet, a steady presence as Maris began examining the files in detail. "Pike's been clever," she explained, her professional focus helping bridge the emotional gap. "He routes everything through charitable donations. See here?" She pointed to a spreadsheet. The Harbor Restoration Fund looks legitimate, but it's a shell. Money goes in as tax-deductible donations, comes out as consulting fees to other shells. Boone leaned forward. Can you trace it back to the brake parts? Give me time. These numbers tell a story. I just need to translate it. She glanced at him. I should have looked harder back then. Should have questioned. Don't, Boone said roughly. You did what you had to do. They worked through the afternoon, Dr. Voss joining them with her own laptop. The veterinarian's quiet competence helped ground them as she created secure backups of everything they found. 3 copies, she explained, in 3 different locations. Even if they find one, the others will be safe. Maris's fingers flew across her keyboard. Look at this. The gala donations. Pike's waterfront benefit next week? It's perfect cover for another round of payments. Everyone who matters will be there. Donors, city officials, press. Willa straightened. That's it. That's our moment. What do you mean? Boone asked. We expose everything right there, in front of everyone who needs to see it. I can stream from the van. We'll need a clear signal and line of sight to the main hall. The service entrance, Maris said suddenly. I've done their books. I know the layout. Boone and I could get in through the kitchen. Staff will be overwhelmed with the event. Dr. Voss nodded slowly. Simple disguises. Nothing elaborate enough to draw attention. Kitchen whites for you two. Willa in the van with the technical setup. Timing will be crucial. They spent the next hour mapping it out. Maris would handle the technical drop, switching the gala's presentation feed to their evidence. Boone would ensure their exit route stayed clear. Willa would maintain the stream from outside, making sure nothing could be buried or denied. No heroics, Willa insisted, looking at Boone. Just get in, trigger the drop, and get out. The truth will do the rest. Rusty shifted, pressing his head against Boone's knee. The dog's steady presence seemed to anchor them all, a reminder of loyalty that transcended the years of silence and hurt. We'll need to move fast once it starts, Maris said, her voice steadier now. Pike will try to shut it down, discredit it. That's why the audience matters, Dr. Voss pointed out. Too many witnesses, too many phones recording. Once, it's out. It's out. They worked through contingencies, backup plans, signal checks. The afternoon light faded to evening as they refined the details. It wasn't just a plan taking shape. It was redemption, justice, and maybe something like forgiveness, though none of them said the word aloud. Finally, Maris closed her laptop. I should go. I'll start mapping the shell companies tonight. Build the clearest possible trail. She hesitated, then touched Boone's arm. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. You're here now, he said simply. She nodded, tears bright behind her glasses. Yes, I am. After she left, Willa looked at Boone. Are you ready for this? He gazed down at Rusty, who gazed back with complete trust. Truth's been a long time coming, he said quietly. It's time people saw it. Dr. Voss began packing up her equipment. I'll have the backup secured by tomorrow. After that, we focus on the gala. The plan was set. In 1 week, Pike's carefully constructed world of influence and impunity would meet something he couldn't buy or bury. The simple, uncompromising power of truth revealed in plain sight. Rusty's tail thumped softly against the van's floor, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, as they prepared for the days ahead. The evening fog rolled in from the harbor, wreathing Pike Holdings' waterfront complex in ghostly tendrils. Willa adjusted her catering uniform, heart hammering against the clip-on name tag. Through her earpiece, she heard Dr. Voss's calm voice from her remote position. Systems check. Hotspot signal is strong and stable. Willa touched her ear discreetly. Copy that? I'm positioned near the service entrance. The benefit was in full swing. crystal glasses catching the light as waiters wove through crowds of Portland's elite. Willa blended with the catering traffic, balancing an empty tray while scanning faces. She spotted Reed across the room, standing close to Pike as they charmed potential donors. In her ear, Maris whispered, "We're in position. Kitchen access secured." Through the swinging doors, Willa caught glimpses of Boone and Maris in their borrowed kitchen whites, looking surprisingly natural among the bustling staff. Boone's weathered hands were clean, his grayed hair trimmed, but his eyes held the same quiet dignity she'd first seen in the rain. "Remember," Dr. Voss said, "timing is everything. Wait for Pike's opening speech before the switch." The giant screens flanking the stage showed a loop of harbor beauty shots, soon to be replaced by uglier truths. Willa's phone, concealed in her apron pocket, was already streaming to backup servers. Pike took the stage, commanding attention with practiced ease. "Welcome, friends. Tonight celebrates not just progress, but vision." "Ready on my mark," Maris murmured. Willa watched Pike gesture towards the screens. "Our commitment to safety and community has never wavered." "Now," Maris said. The screens flickered. Pike's smile froze as grainy security footage replaced his presentation. The date stamp showed the dockyard accident, forklifts struggling with failed brakes, workers diving for cover. Audio crackled through the speakers. "Those parts aren't rated for this load." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones rose like a wave, recording. Pike stepped forward, but the footage kept rolling, email chains appearing in crisp detail. Names, dates, dollar amounts for substandard parts. "Signal holding steady," Dr. Voss reported. "Backup streams are live." Willa kept her camera angle stable, adding quiet narration. "These documents show systematic replacement of safety equipment with substandard materials. The savings were routed through charitable donations." She saw the moment Pike's polish cracked. His face flushed dark as he recognized his own signature on damning paperwork. Reed stood rigid, watching his career implode in high definition. Through the kitchen doors, Willa glimpsed Boone watching the crowd. His expression was complex, not triumph, but something deeper. Faces in the audience registered recognition, then guilt. Board members who'd looked away, officials who'd buried reports. Maris's voice was steady. "Initiating final sequence. Wire transfer graphics loading." The screens began displaying intricate webs of financial connections, shell companies flowing into each other like poison rivers. Each node pulsed with transactions, dates, signatures. Pike lunged for the stage controls. "This is a criminal act of—" The lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing the pier in blood-red light. Shadows leaped and twisted as the crowd murmured in confusion. Through her earpiece, Willa heard Maris curse softly. "He's cutting power to the whole grid sector," Dr. Voss reported. "But we've got enough. The streams are saved, backed up, already spreading." In the crimson emergency lighting, Willa saw security guards moving through the crowd. Nina Caro's voice crackled over their radios. Pike stood on the stage, his composure shattered, barking orders into his phone. "East corridor's still clear," Boone said quietly. "Maris, move now. I'll cover the exit." Willa kept her phone steady, documenting the chaos as the truth refused to be buried. In the red-tinged darkness, she saw phones still recording, voices rising with questions that couldn't be unseen. Pike's carefully constructed world was cracking, and all the power in the grid couldn't stop it. The emergency lights cast everything in shades of red, like blood and water, spreading and unstoppable. "Clear the pier! Everyone out!" Pike's voice boomed through the emergency lighting. His security team herded the stunned crowd toward the exits, their movements sharp and practiced. Willa pressed herself against a pillar, phone still recording. Her battery indicator blinked at 40%, but she wouldn't stop now. "The evacuation appears coordinated," she narrated softly, almost as if a thunderous crack split the air. Orange light flared from the storage area, and thick black smoke began pouring from a wooden shed. The flames climbed fast, too fast to be natural. "Manufactured chaos," Maris whispered through the earpiece, clutching the backup drive. "Classic misdirection." The wind picked up, driving sparks and embers towards the server racks that lined the building's exterior. More concerning were the burning fragments sailing toward the elevated service walkway, where Boone stood with Rusty, surveying escape routes. Heat rolled across the pier in suffocating waves. Willa's eyes stung as she kept recording, her voice growing hoarse, but determined. What appears to be a deliberate fire is spreading rapidly. Emergency responders have not yet arrived. Through the smoke, she glimpsed Nina Caro stalking the perimeter, her tactical gear blending with the shadows. The security chief's movements were predatory, systematic, searching for the physical drives that could still damn Pike in court. "Maris," Boone called out, his voice rough from the smoke. "Southeast exit is still clear. Go now." Rusty pressed against Boone's leg, whining as the flames crept closer. The old dog's amber eyes reflected the inferno, but he wouldn't budge without his master. Willa's phone battery dropped to 30%. She switched to power save mode, still streaming. The truth was out there now, multiplying across servers and screens, but that wouldn't matter if they didn't survive to testify. The crack of splintering wood echoed as part of the walkway caught fire. Boone guided Rusty toward the far stairs, but a section of burning roof crashed down, blocking their path. The heat was becoming unbearable. Distant sirens wailed, but the sound felt impossibly far away. Smoke wreathed the pier in a choking blanket. Maris stumbled toward a side exit, tears streaming from the acrid air. "Stay low!" Willa called out, dropping to her knees where the air was clearer. She kept the camera steady even as her lungs burned. The stream had to continue. People had to see. Nina's voice cut through the roar of flames. "Find those drives! Nothing leaves this pier!" The security team fanned out, flashlight beams cutting through the smoke. They were running out of time and options. Boone crouched beside Rusty on the walkway, scanning desperately for an escape route. The loyal dog refused to leave his side, even as embers singed his fur. The flames advanced from both directions now, turning the elevated path into a burning island. Willa's phone battery flashed red, 20%. The heat was making it overheat, but she couldn't stop recording. Not when Pike's orchestrated chaos threatened to bury the truth again. The inferno tightened its grip on the pier, hungry for evidence and witnesses alike. Steel groaned as support beams warped. The walkway where Boone and Rusty stood swayed ominously. Through the smoke, Willa caught glimpses of Pike watching from the parking lot, his face illuminated by the flames. There was no trace of his polished persona now, only cold calculation as his empire burned rather than face exposure. Maris pressed herself against a wall, protecting the drive with her body as she navigated through the chaos. Her years of quiet compliance had led to this moment of defiance, choking on smoke but refusing to let go of the truth. The fire's roar grew deafening. Willa's streaming narration became a harsh whisper. The fire appears deliberately set, emergency response delayed, witnesses trapped. Nina's flashlight beam swept past, searching. The security chief's silhouette was demonic in the firelight, hunting for the last pieces of physical evidence while everything burned. The walkway gave an ominous creak. Boone wrapped his arms around Rusty, the dog's gray muzzle pressed into his chest. They were running out of options, and the flames kept coming. Sirens grew louder, but still too distant. The fire had them surrounded, and survival was far from certain. The truth might survive in servers and streams, but flesh and blood were more fragile than data. The heat pressed in like a living thing, hungry for secrets and witnesses alike. And still Nina prowled the shadows, ensuring nothing and no one escaped with evidence of Pike's crimes. Willa's phone battery dropped to 15% as she documented it all. The manufactured chaos, the trapped witnesses, the truth fighting to survive in a world of smoke and flame. The fire roared louder, drowning out everything but the sound of survival hanging by a thread. A thunderous crack split the air as a burning support beam crashed down. Boone's cry of pain pierced through the roar of flames. The massive timber had pinned his leg against the walkway, trapping him in the path of the advancing inferno. Rusty barked frantically, pacing around his trapped master. Smoke stung the old dog's eyes, but he refused to retreat to safety. "Go," Boone commanded through gritted teeth, his face contorted in agony. "Get out of here, boy." But Rusty's loyalty ran deeper than fear. The dog's amber eyes scanned the area, landing on something glinting in the firelight. Willa's crowbar, dropped in the chaos. Without hesitation, Rusty bounded through the smoke and grabbed the metal tool in his jaws. "Smart boy," Boone whispered as Rusty dragged the crowbar within his reach. His fingers closed around the cold steel, knuckles white with determination. Each movement sent waves of pain through his trapped leg, but he worked the crowbar under the beam, using it as a lever. Muscles straining, sweat mixing with soot on his face, Boone pushed with everything he had. The beam shifted slightly. Another push, and he managed to slide his leg free. The relief was immediate, though his ankle throbbed dangerously. Through the swirling smoke, a small sound caught his attention. A whimper that didn't come from Rusty. Boone squinted through the haze and his heart stopped. On a gangway extending over the water, a young boy stood frozen in terror. The metal walkway swayed precariously, weakened by the heat. "Pike's grandson," Boone breathed, recognizing the child from news photos. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old, separated from the evacuating crowd in the chaos. In that moment, 10 years of bitterness and injustice melted away. The man who had destroyed Boone's life had left his own grandson to burn. There was no choice to make. "Hold on, kid," Boone shouted, forcing himself to his feet. His injured ankle screamed in protest as he limped toward the gangway. Rusty stayed close, offering support when Boone stumbled. The heat was suffocating now. The gangway groaned ominously as Boone made his way across. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "I've got you," Boone said softly, reaching the child. "We're getting out of here." He scooped the boy into his arms, trying to shield him from the worst of the smoke. The gangway swayed more violently with each step back toward safety. Willa appeared through the haze, arms outstretched. "Hurry," she called. "It's going to give." Boone passed the boy to her just as a horrible screech of tearing metal filled the air. The gangway's supports failed, and the structure began to collapse. Boone felt the floor disappear beneath his feet as he plunged toward the dark water below. A sharp pain in his arm stopped his fall. Rusty had lunged forward, powerful jaws clamped firmly but gently on Boone's sleeve. The old dog's legs splayed for purchase on the remaining platform, refusing to let go. "Hold on!" Willa cried, grabbing Boone's other arm. Together with Rusty, she hauled him up onto solid ground. They collapsed in a heap, gasping for air in the toxic smoke. Boone's lungs felt like they were on fire as he coughed violently. His ankle throbbed and his arm ached where Rusty's teeth had saved him, but he was alive. The boy clung to Willa, sobbing but unharmed. Rusty pressed against Boone's side, tail wagging despite the danger still surrounding them. The dog's unwavering faith had never faltered, not in 10 years of hardship, and not in the face of death itself. Through the smoke, Boone caught Pike's expression as the businessman spotted his grandson in Willa's arms. For the first time, the mighty CEO's mask cracked, showing raw fear and relief. But Boone didn't save the boy for Pike's sake, or for redemption, or even for justice. He did it because it was right. The flames still raged, but something had shifted. In choosing compassion over vengeance, in risking his life for the grandson of his enemy, Boone had proven what the years of hardship couldn't break: his fundamental decency, his unshakable moral core. His integrity, it turned out, was the one thing Pike had never been able to take away. Not with money, not with power, not with a decade of systematic destruction. In the face of fire and fate, Boone had chosen to be the hero rather than the victim. Rusty licked his hand as emergency sirens grew closer, first responders finally arriving. The old dog's faith had never wavered. And in this moment of truth, that faith had helped transform a story of injustice into one of triumph. Not through revenge, but through the pure, unbreakable spirit of human goodness. Through the chaos of smoke and flame, police sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights strobed across the waterfront as squad cars screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, trying to make sense of the scene before them. Willa's hands were steady on her phone, continuing to stream. The evidence they'd gathered played in an endless loop on surviving screens and was being shared across thousands of devices. There would be no burying this truth now. "Over there!" an officer shouted, spotting Nina Caro sprinting along the edge of the pier. She clutched a hard drive to her chest, face twisted with desperate determination. But Maris Keller stood near the dock controls, her bookkeeper's precision serving a final purpose. As Nina raced past, Maris's trembling hand found the dock release lever. With a mechanical groan, the section of dock beneath Nina's feet dropped. She plunged into the shallow water with a splash, the drive slipping from her grasp. Officers converged, wading in to secure both the evidence and Pike's enforcer. Nina thrashed and cursed, but handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Through the thinning smoke, Harlan Pike emerged. His expensive suit was ash-stained, his silver hair disheveled. He stopped short at the sight before him, his grandson, safe but sooty, still clinging to Boone Keller. The man Pike had systematically destroyed had just saved what Pike held most precious. The businessman's face drained of color as he looked from this living contradiction to the damning evidence still playing on phones and tablets all around him. Years of careful manipulation and power plays crumbled in the face of simple human decency. The truth Pike had buried was rising, and the man he'd tried to erase had proven more worthy than him in every way that mattered. "Harlan Pike," a detective announced, stepping forward. "We have some questions about certain financial records that have come to light." Pike's shoulders slumped as the detective continued reading his rights. More officers moved in, securing the scene and gathering statements. The handcuffs seemed especially bright under the emergency lights as they closed around Pike's wrists. Willa kept her camera steady, documenting it all. She zoomed in carefully on faces and badges, making sure every timestamp and name was clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth finally finding its voice. "The evidence transfer records are all here," Maris said quietly, handing a backup drive to a detective. Her voice shook, but her spine was straight. "Every transaction, every shell company, every falsified safety report. I've prepared a complete audit trail." The night air filled with radio chatter and the thud of authority doing its job at last. Evidence bags were labeled, statements taken, arrests processed with methodical care. The truth they'd fought so hard to expose was finally being heard by those with the power to act on it. Rusty pressed against Boone's leg, tail wagging despite the commotion. The old dog had never lost faith in his human, even when the whole world had turned its back. Now that faith was vindicated in the most public way possible. Officers led Nina and Pike toward separate patrol cars, their empire of intimidation dissolving in the harsh light of justice. The woman who had enforced Pike's will through violence and the man who had wielded power like a weapon. Both were reduced now to what they truly were, criminals facing consequences at last. Willa lowered her phone finally, the stream still pushing their evidence out to thousands of viewers. There would be no containing this story, no burying these truths. The careful documentation of names, dates, and crimes would ensure that justice had more than just a fighting chance. It had undeniable proof. The waterfront echoed with sirens and voices, the thud of car doors, the squawk of radios. But beneath it all was the sound of truth finally breaking free, of power answering to justice, of wrong finally being set right. Pike's carefully constructed world of influence and intimidation was crumbling, one arrest at a time. Through it all, Boone stood tall, his integrity intact despite everything they had tried to take from him. In saving a child, he had proven himself the better man. In choosing compassion over vengeance, he had won something far more valuable than mere revenge. The truth was out, justice was in motion, and his name would finally be cleared in the light of day. The wheels of justice turned with unexpected speed once the evidence was secured. Within days, Reed Danner's sleek office was being boxed up, his career imploding as investigators traced his signatures across a web of fraudulent transfers. The indictment landed with a thud of paper that echoed through the courthouse halls. 37 counts of financial fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. In a fluorescent-lit municipal office, Boone Keller stood before a plain blue backdrop. His clothes were clean, borrowed from a donation center but pressed with care. The camera clicked, capturing eyes that had seen the worst of humanity but hadn't lost their steady gaze. No fanfare marked the moment, just the quiet scratch of a pen as his identity was formally restored. The clerk's stamp fell with a satisfying thunk, making it official. "That's you. Legally you again?" the clerk said, sliding the new ID across the counter. Boone's calloused fingers traced his name on the card. 10 years of being nobody ended with this small piece of plastic. His throat tightened as he tucked it into his wallet. At the clinic, Lenora Voss adjusted her glasses and smiled as she watched Boone fill out Rusty's license renewal. The old dog sat perfectly still, as if he understood the importance of the moment. His gray muzzle had more white now, but his eyes were bright as ever. "Print your name here," Dr. Voss said, tapping the form. "Your real name." Boone's handwriting was careful, each letter distinct. No more hiding, no more shadows. Rusty's tail thumped against the exam room floor as Boone signed, making it official. They belonged to each other, legally and completely. "There," Dr. Voss said, adding her witness signature. Her normally pragmatic voice held a hint of emotion. "All proper and documented." In the doorway, Maris shifted her weight from foot to foot. She'd brought coffee, a peace offering that was cooling on the counter. The gap between siblings yawned wide with unspoken words and missed years, but she was trying. That counted for something. "The prosecutors say they'll have your record expunged by next week," she said, her bookkeeper's precision showing in how she tracked every detail of his case. The assault charge. They found the original witness statements. The ones that were buried. They prove it was fabricated. Boone nodded, his jaw tight. The legal machinery that had once crushed him was now grinding toward justice, erasing the false charge that had helped destroy his life. But he wasn't focused on vengeance anymore. He was looking forward, toward rebuilding. "Thank you," he said simply, meeting his sister's eyes. "For helping. For believing." The words weren't fancy, but they were genuine. Maris blinked rapidly, pushing her glasses up her nose. A decade of distance began to crack, letting something fragile but real take root. Rusty moved between them, pressing against Maris's leg before returning to Boone's side. The dog had always been good at building bridges, at sensing when humans needed a gentle nudge toward each other. Dr. Voss busied herself with paperwork, giving the siblings space. She'd seen enough healing in her career to recognize its quiet beginnings. Some wounds needed time and silence more than words. The afternoon light slanted through the clinic windows, turning dust motes to gold. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, but in here, something profound was settling into place. Identity restored, name reclaimed, family tentatively reaching across old wounds. These were the building blocks of a life reconstructing itself. Rusty's new tags jingled as Boone clipped them to his collar, official proof that dog and man belonged together, that both of them existed in the eyes of the law. The sound seemed to echo with possibility, with the promise of better days ahead. Dawn painted the pier in soft pastels, turning the harbor water into liquid gold. The morning air carried the familiar scent of salt and seaweed, while seagulls wheeled overhead, their calls mixing with the distant hum of a city waking up. For waterfront seemed somehow different now, cleansed of old shadows, ready for new stories. Boone stood at the weathered railing, his shoulders straight in a way they hadn't been for years. The weight of being nobody had lifted, replaced by the simple dignity of existing as himself again. Beside him, Maris hesitated, then stepped closer. 10 years of distance dissolved as brother and sister shared a proper embrace, one that held all the words they didn't need to say out loud. "I'll call next week," Maris said softly, her practical nature showing in the specific promise. "Maybe we could have coffee?" Boone nodded, his throat tight. "I'd like that." No grand speeches passed between them. They were both too private for that. But the promise of future conversations hung in the air like hope. Delicate, but real. Maris squeezed his arm once more before heading toward her car, her sensible shoes clicking against the wooden planks. The sound of approaching footsteps made Rusty's ears perk up. Willa appeared, carrying 3 paper cups of coffee from the dockside cafe. Her auburn hair caught the morning light as she handed drinks around, keeping one for herself. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had fought a long battle and found herself exactly where she needed to be. "Reed's office called," she said, leaning against the railing. "They're trying to negotiate terms for his plea deal." Boone watched a fishing boat cut through the harbor. "How are you holding up with all that?" "Better than I expected." Willa's smile held no regret. "The engagement ring is back with his family. It feels clean, like waking up from a dream that wasn't quite right." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee. The truth had cost them both. Willa's carefully planned future, Boone's lost decade. But what remained felt solid, built on bedrock instead of shifting sand. Courage had proved stronger than comfort, loyalty more valuable than security. Rusty pressed against their legs, his gray muzzle lifted to catch the morning breeze. His presence had always been the thread connecting their lives, even before they knew it. Now he settled between them like he belonged there. Like this was exactly where all three of them should be. "You know," Willa said, "I used to think I had everything figured out. Career path, 5-year plan, the whole package." She laughed softly. "Now I'm just taking it one day at a time." Boone turned to face her, really seeing her. This woman who had risked everything to help a stranger and his dog, who had chosen truth over safety and never looked back. "One day sounds good to me." He didn't offer forever. She didn't ask for promises. They had both learned that the future reveals itself in its own time. Instead, they chose this moment, this morning, this shared cup of coffee by the water. The newspaper headlines about Pike's arrest and Reed's indictment would fade. The official investigations would grind on through the system. But here, in the gentle light of dawn, something simpler and more profound was taking root. The quiet certainty of two people who had seen each other's true character under fire and recognized something worth holding on to. Rusty's tail wagged as a flock of pigeons scattered nearby. His new tags caught the sunlight, chiming softly with each movement. He was home. They all were, in a way that had nothing to do with buildings or addresses. The city continued its morning rhythm beyond the waterline, but it felt distant, like music from another room. Here at the railing, time slowed to the pace of waves against pilings and coffee cooling in paper cups. Boone stood straight and unafraid, a man who had reclaimed not just his name, but his whole self. And beside him, Willa chose this day, this moment, this beginning. When they finally turned to leave, their steps fell naturally in sync. Rusty trotted between them, his presence a bridge connecting past to present, struggle to peace. Ahead lay an ordinary door, a simple threshold. But for a man walking forward as himself, with a loyal dog waiting and a brave woman beside him, it held all the promise of sunrise. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.